From the recent survey I conducted a few days back, I have come to determine that there are quite a few people that are planning on having riding adventures this spring, summer, and fall. I was quite surprised at the numbers that I saw. Also, I've noticed that several people are planning on joining me at the Vagabond Rally. Quite a few people, another shocking statistic. And maybe a few of those are going to continue on in the journey from the rally and beyond. And I would like to assume that everyone that is planning on joining us on this adventure is an expert motorcycle camper. I would like to assume that, but that would be very foolish. I know better. I'm sure there's going to be a wide range, a wide variety of people and experience, not only in motorcycle riding, but motorcycle camping especially, because that takes a while to become an expert. So I decided that I would sit down and make out a checklist for everybody, even maybe the more experienced folks that have had some adventures before. Just a little checklist for you to look at and maybe go through your items that you need to think about before you leave on this adventure, because I want everybody to be successful. And it's kind of ridiculous to assume that everybody's got to learn the hard way like I did. There's one good thing to be said about learning it the hard way. You learn it really well. You learn it really well. It becomes ingrained in your head. But there's no need. While we're waiting on the Motorcycle Camping Guide for Dummies, please enjoy this checklist for motorcycle adventure. Just a few things. 3 categories: critical ideas for success, important ideas for success, and then just finally good ideas. Some things that are probably going to help you along. Pay the most attention to the critical ideas. These are the most important things that will help you not only be successful, but be safe, be comfortable, and enjoy, and maybe want to come back and do more adventures in the future. Critical ideas. There's 3. In my mind, there are 3 critical ideas. The first that comes to mind is temperature regulation, staying warm, staying cool. They can both be an issue as you're traveling across any continent. As you're gaining elevation and descending, deserts can be very hot, mountains can be very cold. They can both be wet, believe it or not. And staying warm and dry is probably the most important. Staying warm and cool really requires good gear, or well thought out gear. If not good gear, well thought out gear. I like to use layering. Since my ride this year is going to transition from spring into summer, I'm going to ride with layers. More importantly than having winter gear or summer gear, I'm going to have both. So I'm going to be riding with a mesh jacket and mesh pants and have rain gear in addition. So if I'm going across passes, that mesh gear that is very breathable in the summer is going to be life-threatening going over passes, especially if I'm wet. So my rain gear is going to double as a winter layer and a rain layer. And all I have to do underneath that is to put a base layer underneath. The base layers that I typically use for my torso is a nice thick fleece. That works really good at camp, and it also works really good to keep the drafts from coming through your jacket. I also travel with a poly layer, something that is on my skin. A good base layer, a good poly layer I like to use. Wool, poly, there's all kinds of things out there. The things that are touching your skin. On top of that, I like to wear another base layer, a fleece, sweater, something like that. Something that's thick enough to keep the airflow out of my jacket. And it also can work really well at camp on colder days. I've talked about staying warm and cool and staying dry. It's really good to have some kind of dry weather gear. If you're riding in summer and your riding gear is winter gear or wet weather gear, if it's a solid piece, unless it has really good ventilation, you might get in trouble in the hotter areas. I would love to bring 2 different types of riding gear, but having two pair of jackets and 2 pair of pants is it's absurd. It's an absurd amount of bulk and weight, and I'm just not going to do it. A wet weather gear layer is easily stashed in a saddlebag, at least for me. And it's worth the weight and the bulk. Absolutely 100%. I've got to stay dry especially in cold weather. Warm weather doesn't really matter if I get wet. Sometimes it can get cold though in warmer weather. Usually, wet weather brings cold air with it. That's typically why it's raining. Is cold, moist air is hitting the warm air that maybe you're sitting in, and all the temperature changes. You've probably noticed it before, depending on where you live. Maybe it's been a dramatic change. Like I've seen weather go from 80s and 90s to into the 40s and 50s pretty quickly, and especially at altitude, it can happen really quickly at altitude. Another critical component, and the final critical component, is staying comfortable. And all of those components before, staying warm, staying cool, staying dry, those are very important. But also, you're going to have the ability to camp comfortably. If you can't camp comfortably, you're not going to be on the road for very long. You're not going to last out there just because you're going to be miserable every day. You might be suffering from hypothermia. If you're cold and wet at night and shivering, you might make it through the night, but you might not. But if you do that a few days in a row, it's gonna end your adventure, or you're gonna have to stop somewhere in a big city and find some replacement gear or something that's appropriate. And I don't want to see that happen to you. I mentioned layers earlier. Layers to me are essential for comfortable riding and camping. Uh, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be wearing 3 layers: a mesh layer for riding, wet weather gear underneath that for cold or weather riding, and a base layer underneath that. So I will essentially have not fantastic cold weather riding gear, but enough to get across the passes and be able to be comfortable while riding. That's pretty important. That and a pair of gloves are essential. I've got a pair of heated gloves that I'm carrying. I also like to carry a pair of leather gloves for around camp. So I am always going to have a pair of dry gloves. Wet weather gloves are kind of hard to find. They're very expensive and they don't last very long. The waterproofing doesn't last very long. So I always try to carry 2 pair of riding gloves. And like I said, the pair of leather gloves. Those items are essential for me. Another item in this whole list of comfort and staying warm and dry and cool, having at least 2 changes of clothes. So, in other words, everything you need to stay warm and dry: 2 pair of socks, 2 shirts, 2 pair of underwear, 2 pair of something to keep your legs warm. Odds are, if you're traveling across country, you're going to get wet. Odds are really good. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck somewhere that you don't want to be. I have seen weather systems come and sit for days, and I've seen weather systems come in waves. So if you don't want to sit and be stuck there, sometimes you got to brave the weather and get through it to be able to to live outside of the weather. But if you're riding in rain, odds are some part of your body's going to get wet. No matter what kind of special $1 million riding gear you've got, odds are, from my experience, the last 40 something years of riding, especially riding in the rain a lot. I've ridden in the rain a good bit, and I've come to determine that the best riding gear that money can buy is still going to leak a little bit somewhere. It's going to go in somewhere and get something wet. And it's pretty miserable coming into camp wet like a puppy dog trying to go to sleep in something wet. But if you can just change out, even if it's dirty, even if you're changing into dirty clothes, even if they're dirty, I would much prefer dirty, dry clothes to clean, wet clothes. And of course, socks. Man, socks, you gotta have some extra pairs of socks. Socks get pretty dirty and stinky really fast for most people. So I would say maybe throw in a couple of extra pair of socks. Just make you feel better. And there's nothing worse than wet feet at camp. Lucky for me, I only have to carry 1 sock. With all these critical ideas in mind, the one thing I keep harping on motorcycle campers is test your gear. You camped in it last year? Really? Set it up again. Make sure you spray some water on your tarp or your tent. Make sure it doesn't leak. Make sure the zippers aren't broken. Make sure all the stuff is there. Make sure it all goes back into the bag that you're taking on your trip. Test your gear. If it fails and you're in your backyard and you figure out at 3 a.m. that you're cold or it's wet, it's so much easier to just walk back in the house than having to load up on your bike and go to civilization while you're cold and wet in the middle of nowhere. Think about that. Think about that. I've been in that situation before. I've got some really good video of a buddy. Luckily, it was summer and it was cold because the rainstorm just came through, but he survived. But it was a miserable thing, and he even heard me harping about testing your gear. Not test your camping gear. Make sure everything's working before you leave the house. Make sure that your cold weather gear is working. Make sure that your wet weather gear is not leaking, or at least to the point where it's going to make you miserable and cold and hypothermic. Back to the third item, staying comfortable. Staying comfortable is very important. That's why it's on the critical list. Staying comfortable allows you to sleep at camp. If you're not sleeping well, you're going to be miserable and your trip's probably going to be shorter than you would like. And you may not want to come back next year if you're miserable. So make sure that you're going to be comfortable at camp. I test my gear all the time. I'm still testing a hammock out. My new hammock, I'm still testing it out. I'm making sure that I understand where the issues are, how to set it up, how to stay warm, how to stay comfortable, how to sleep well at night. Those things are critical for me because I'm out on the road for weeks and months at a time. I don't have time for all that. I can't sleep. I only got 2 hours of sleep or whatever. That just sucks, and I don't want anything to do with it. Those are the critical ideas. The important ideas. Before you leave on your trip, make sure that all your bike maintenance has been taken care of. That's tires, brakes, chain and sprockets, oil and filters, all those things that you don't want to have to maintain on the road. It gets expensive, it gets costly in time, and it kind of takes away from the journey. If you're putting a lot of miles on your bike like I do, you're going to have to go through tires. You're going to have to change your oil. Those are just part of things that you're going to have to deal with on the road if you're doing a lot of miles. It's not really any way you can get around that. I guess you could avoid the maintenance completely. Don't avoid changing out your tires. But if you can do all this maintenance before you leave, it saves time. It's probably going to save you a little bit of money. And it's going to save you some disappointment because trying to find the tires that you want on the road is kind of tricky sometimes. They're not always in the spots that you are. And when they are, when you have to order them, sometimes they get pretty expensive. So if you could do all that, most of your maintenance before you leave, you're going to save time and money, and you're going to have a much more enjoyable time not having to do maintenance on the road. Tools. Do you have a toolkit on your bike? Not the one that came with your motorcycle. Do you have a toolkit to do all the maintenance items that I listed above? Can you change your tires? Can you adjust your chain and sprockets? Can you change your oil? Do you know how to do all that? All that needs to be on your bike because the people that you may be riding with this spring and summer may not have the tools that you need. There's a lot of specialty tools that come with motorcycles. I'm just thinking of BMW. I've had a couple of BMWs and they both had specialty tools to be able to do pretty much anything on a daggone bike. So if you don't have those tools, don't be looking around at your buddies hoping that they will. The third important idea is know your bike. Have a good general idea of where your fuses are, where your switches are, things that you need to know to operate your bike properly. You need to know that. And if you don't, maybe take the little manual that comes with the bike. Maybe bring that with you in case you need some help. Here's one that a lot of people are going to ignore. Rider assessment. Are you going to be able to assess not only your skill level, but your ability to ride a few hundred miles in a day and ride there and ride back? Have you ever done that? Maybe it's time to consider not only your skill level, but maybe do an assessment. I usually do a skill assessment every spring. I put something out so you can assess your skills, your riding ability in a parking lot really quickly. It takes a few minutes, and it's also something that you could practice. Just say you're rusty because your bike's been sitting all winter. Get out there in the parking lot and do this drill that I'll show you. Get yourself a good rider assessment really quickly. If you're completely clueless and you're a new rider and this feels completely uncomfortable to you, consider taking a riding course before you depart on your adventure. Also with this assessment comes the question should pop up into your mind, can I make it across country and back? Well, with enough determination, I guess you can. Wherever you're going, I'm guessing with enough determination, you can get there and back. But have some have some ideas of what kind of range you could do in a day, your energy level at the end of the day. Know yourself. Be able to predict what your behavior is after a long day of riding. Maybe you should shorten your riding days. I mean, I've gotten my riding days have gotten shorter over the years. I just feel a little bit more energetic at the end of the day if I stop earlier. So a lot of days I've only ride 2 or 3 hours between camps. Of course, I don't get a lot of riding done, but I'm not tired. I'm not beaten down, and that comes with a good ability to assess yourself. Rider assessment. It's very important. Emergencies. Have you thought about an emergency at all? And I don't want to push this too much because I don't want to that idea of fear popping into everybody's head. If you've got an idea of an adventure, just get out there and do it. But give some thought to emergencies. What happens if my bike breaks? What happens if I break? What's the plan? Have just something to think about. It's not something to obsess over. If you obsess over stuff like this, you'll never get out the door. And I don't want to see that happen. So just give it some thought. The last category is good ideas. They're not a necessity, but it's kind of a good idea to have a few of these things in mind. The first is, do you have a spare key? Are you putting it on the bike anywhere? Just say you lose your keys. What are you going to do if you're on the other side of the country? Have somebody ship your keys? Can they find your other keys? I like carrying a spare key with me, and I usually carry one for the top box and one for the motorcycle. Is there a contact number for your loved ones, your family, your friends? Do you have a contact number? I'm the folks that are going to ride with me, leaving the rally. Those people are going to provide me with contact numbers, and we're all going to have a list of everybody that's riding with us. Contact numbers, emergency contact numbers. I think it's a good idea. Most of the folks that I hang out with are, my age, a few a little bit younger, a few a little bit older. We don't have that much time left. What happens if I stroke out? I want everybody to be able to know who to contact. I think it's a good idea. And if you're not riding with somebody else, maybe have something in your wallet that identifies who to call in case of emergency. Imagine yourself on the side of the road in a ditch. Maybe somebody needs to make some decisions about what to do with your stuff and your dead body. I don't know, just some thoughts. How about this? Not a lot of people think about this until they hit the road. What are you going to do about that phone? Do you have some charging gear on your bike to be able to charge your phone? It's a whole lot easier than you think, but it's not something you really want to put into place. Depending on the motorcycle you've got, a lot of newer bikes all have ports to charge, but some of the older bikes, they don't have charging ports. And what do? You got to go to a hotel and charge them up, or sit in McDonald's for 2 or 3 hours. Don't do that. At least bring a wall wart so you can charge your phone up at McDonald's. If you don't do anything else, bring something to charge your phone. Electronics need to be charged every day or so, typically. So make sure that that's taken care of. Either it's on your bike or have some kind of a battery pack, maybe. Most importantly, you should probably have an idea for your budget turnaround point. That's kind of what I do every year is go, okay, when I get to this number, in my bank account, I got to start thinking about turning around and going back. And you also have to assess, tires, fuel. You have to throw all that into your budget too. So, you can race all the way home. You're going to spend more in fuel, maybe spend more on tires and such. You'll get there sooner. So the food budget is not getting eaten up as much. But the longer you take on the road, the more you're going to spend, and that's typical. And a lot of people keep asking me the same question: is what's your daily budget? And that's really hard to say. If you're riding every day, you're going to be spending more. If you're eating at restaurants every day, you're going to be spending more. If you're staying in hotels, you're going to be spending more. So I can't really account for that. I can just say I have uh, I have spent less than $10 a day. If I'm not riding every day, it's pretty easy to live $10 to $15 a day in food. Depends on what you eat. I mean, if you're eating steak every day, even if you're cooking steak at camp, it's you're going to be spending more. So it's hard for me to say this is my budget and this budget will work for you because I don't live the same way as everybody else. But I know it's possible to live, as long as you're not riding, it's possible to eat on less than $10 a day. And look at me, I look pretty healthy, right? The only other thing I can think of right off the top of my head is um, your incidentals, your toiletries, things like that. Um, I would say I learned this at the Vagabond Rally a few years back, is bathing is really important, but in lieu of a shower, a handy shower nearby, or a water source even, to grab a shower, baby wipes. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So grab you some baby wipes. Um, Cracks and crevices will maintain you. Used to be my cutoff was 3 days without a shower out in the wilderness. That's as far as I could go. Now it's probably closer to a week with baby wipes. It's a game changer, and I think that that's going to take care of most of folks, especially the folks that are riding this spring, maybe to the rallies. That'll get you out there. Everything else, um, typically you can pick up at the Vagabond Rally. You can learn how to cook and take care of other things. Camping. This is 101. Camping perfection is that's camping 201, and you can learn that at the Vagabond Rally. And I hope to see everybody on the road. If I don't see you at the rallies, I'm thinking 2025 is going to be an extraordinary year for adventure. So I look forward to seeing you guys out there. Otherwise, I'll just see you here next video.
So if you see me passing by, don't be shy. Wave hello or stop to say hi. I'm always down to chat, share the vibe. Moto Giants here, it's more than a ride.